What's up, guys? Also Footballtalk here. We have finally arrived at the last edition of these NFL draft breakdown videos where we've talked about every single team's draft class, putting them into context with the rest of the roster, and then rank the halls inside each division against each other. We'll do the same here one more time for the Broncos, Chiefs, Raiders, and Chargers. And if you enjoy the analysis, I'd really appreciate it if you decide to listen to all of the other ones when you're sat in the car, getting some work done in the yard or whatever, because I believe the amount of time that I've spent evaluating these draft prospects and going through each team's roster, I can offer a perspective that you won't find on your general TV networks or whatever, where you've heard the same stuff 100 times already. As always, we only take the available resources at draft weekend into account, although I will mention how teams got some extra picks or why they may not have not had a certain selection anymore due to trades, so it all makes sense for you. Timestamps for each individual team and the divisional draft ranking are down below as well. So one more time, here's the AFC West, starting with the Denver Broncos, who didn't make a selection until the final pick of the second round, which they got in return for Von Miller from the Rams in the middle of last season, since they gave up a first and a second rounder each this and next year, along with 3 actual players in the Russell Wilson trade. The meat of the draft, however, came in those 5 picks between 115 and 171st overall. Let me quickly run you through the selections that they made. Second round 64th overall, Nick Bonito, edge defender at Oklahoma. Third round 80th overall, Greg Dulcich, tight end UCLA. Back-to-back 4th rounders, 115th overall, Damari Mathis, cornerback Pittsburgh, and Ioma Iwazurike, the interior D lineman out of Iowa State. 3 5th rounders, Delaren Turner-Yell, safety Oklahoma. Montreal Washington, wide receiver Samford, and Luke Waltenberg, interior O-line out of Washington. And then they closed out with 2 Wisconsin players in the 6th round, 26th overall interior D lineman Matt Henningsen and Fionn Hicks, the cornerback, in the 7th round. Starting things off here with Nick Bonito, who has been one of the most productive pass rushers we've seen in college football, led all FBS edge defenders in pass rush win rate and pressure rate generated in 2020, with just a slight drop off last season. He shows great snap anticipation, really flashes that speed up the arc, and has cat-like quickness to leave blockers behind in the dust on inside moves. Bonito is slippery in the run game to back the blockers and consistently is first to shoot his hands when having to lock out against guys, but certainly pretty undersized for a full-time edge role. At 6'3", below 250 pounds and only 32.5-inch arms, that create issues for him in the run game on several occasions, trying to actually set a physical edge. He lacks any type of power element as a pass rusher at this point, and his lack of length makes getting off guys who get into his frame rather tough. With the big free agency addition of Randy Gregory, across from Bradley Chubb now, and even Jonathan Cooper showing signs late last season, this is a situation where Bonito doesn't have to play a whole lot early on, and can just deliver a spark as a pass rush specialist, which I think is good for him early on at least. Bringing us to Greg Dulcich, the UCLA tight end, who recorded career highs in 2021 with 42 catches for 725 yards and 5 touchdowns. He presents a chiseled physique and really eats up ground with those long strides on benders and seam routes, as well as working across and deep overs. His 18.3 yards per grab is indicative of that big playability that he displays. He picks up big yardage in a hurry with those long strides in run after catch situations as well, and he has no lack of willingness or low body strength to make an impact as a blocker. Although he does get very tall, and his hands end up outside the frame of defenders in the run game on too many occasions, his pads get popped backwards, and the functional strength doesn't really add up to his frame. He wasn't asked to execute a lot of precise breaks, and when he did have to, he typically rounded those off. But he ended up as my tight end number 2, and I think really good replacement for Noah Fant, as somebody who can really stress defenses down the seams, although I was excited for Albert O fantasy season to be honest. But now Denver can go to 12 personnel and have those 2 big bodies streaking down either hash for Russ Wilson, opening up room for those receivers to break underneath as well. Then we get those 2 back-to-back 4th rounders, first up with Damari Mathis, somebody who I didn't get to watch until late in the process, because initially he was listed as a safety on a lot of the lists that I look at when I put together the names that I actually want to watch, and then just never got there since I realized he's a corner and they had that position group finished already. However, he did end up right in that range for me ultimately where he was picked. Features good size at just under 6 feet, 200 pounds, played in a defensive scheme that left the corners on an island for the most part in man or match quarters and held up more than just well. Has easy speed to carry routes down the sideline, those 32-inch arms to engage with his targets, and deny easy inside access. And he has a quick trigger upfield where he can really boom receivers in the flats or runs his way in cover 2. there are definitely some false steps, and you see him have to spin back around on too many occasions, losing contact with the guy across from him. He can get a little too aggressive with lunging and drew 17 penalties over the last 2 seasons combined, so he'll have to keep his weight centered more so. With Kieran Williams being brought in to start nickel, it looks like a battle between Ronald Darby, Michael Ojemudia, and now Mathis for that second starting corner spot on the perimeter, across from pertains, and I believe this guy has a chance to ultimately earn that gig thanks to his competitive nature. Then the guy next up, Unwazurike, another very intriguing prospect, 6'6", 315 pounds, with a massive 85-inch wingspan, breathtaking first step for a guy's size I would say, displays some highly impressive lateral movement skills, and ability to change directions in the run game. He's a problem to deal with on slants due to his explosiveness, packs a fluid swing move, and the hips to corners rushes effectively, which led to 43 total pressures on 345 pass rush snaps last season, despite playing the A-gaps or straight up on tackles quite a bit, where he didn't have that ability to just get up the field and win single blocks. However, Wazurike tries to slide inside of blocks a little too quickly as the back slightly dips that way and then gets back outside. He tends to get sealed away from the action, and instead of actively working over the top of blocks, and he's way too reactionary as a pass rusher at this point, rather than bringing a plan and executing it at a high level. He's going to be an interesting fit because he can really play all over the line, and other than recently signed DJ Jones, they have no real proven commodity on the interior, so I could see him give them some solid snaps right away, depending on where they actually want to fit him. And that brings us to the 3 5th-rounders that they had. First up here with Turner Yell, who shows good range and run support, chase things down from the backside, pretty loose hips overall to flip and run, shows the bursting cover 2 to make plays at the numbers, while having plenty of experience rotating into the deep middle. His coaches said that he was a tone setter since the day that he showed up, with his on-field motor and team-first attitude. He does get over-skied and goes airborne too often as a tackler, however, and misses because of it. You routinely see him clutching air and touches out to the sideline, while he's trying to drive down from depth. And more advanced passer will be able to take advantage of him and open up shots down the field with the eyes. He's missed time as well with injuries in all 4 years at OU, so that's another concern that I have here. Denver drafted a couple of safeties last year that I liked quite a bit. They bring back their starting duo that they had, and I like J.R. Reed quite a bit, who was an undrafted free agent for Jacksonville a couple of years ago. So I don't see a path for playing time early on for this guy necessarily, other than covering kicks. Leading us to a guy from a much smaller program, Stanford, and Montreal Washington just looked different to the rest of the receivers on the team when he was pushing vertically, has some serious shake of the line and shows the suddenness to avoid ancillary zone defenders. His ball tracking down the field is excellent, and he's slippery with the ball in his hands, making him a weapon on jet sweeps, reverses and stuff like that. Most importantly for this team, however, Washington racked up 5 career touchdown returns, including an awesome 98-yarder versus Florida in 2021, where he has the speed and elusiveness to break free. He does feature a tiny wingspan of just 71 inches, which severely limits his catch radius, yet he only had 6 reps on the bench press, so it's not like he was able to really take advantage of it and has a lot of upper body strength necessarily. Didn't run a very complex route tree at Samford, while his size does show up in the way that tacklers toss him to the turf a lot of times and his inability to contribute much as a blocker. But the Broncos finished the season ranked 20th in the NFL in average punt return yardage and ranked dead last in the league in kickoff return average. So this was a clear special teams pick, and I think Washington can immediately add a dynamic element in that facet. I actually posted one of his clips on Instagram and sent a couple of DMs back and forth with him. Seems like a really cool dude, and I'm excited to watch his career progress. And then the final 5th rounder, Luke Wattenberg, somebody who rapidly covers ground laterally to attach to the down lineman and then is quick to come off to linebackers and zone runs. Plus he was used on some wraparound pulls, has impressive lower body flexibility and ability to re-anchor along with vice grip hands to shut down interior pass rushers and not really give them an angle on him. Right around 300 pounds, Wattenberg simply doesn't pack a ton of power to overwhelm guys at the point of attack or stand his ground against bigger nose tackles. And then his weight gets shifted out in front in the process because he has to compensate for it to some degree, which more advanced defenders will be able to pull him off to the side and create some issues for him there. Not very deep across the board on the O-line for Denver, and Wattenberg has plenty of experience, even if I might have thought there were better options on the board at that point. But unless you count Quinn Miners as that, they don't really have another natural center on the roster, so I get that. And then the 2 Wisconsin guys, Matt Henningsen, 6'3", 290 pounds, with some tremendous athletic testing at the Wisconsin Pro Day. A guy who has lined up pretty much anywhere from a 0 to a 4-eye technique, Made a couple of flash plays, it felt like every game, and was a worker bee for the Badgers defense with a great rip-through move to get into the backfield and make things happen. But unfortunately, it's never become more than flashes for him. Lacks any polish as a pass rusher, being able to set up and add moves on top of each other, and not a consistent disruptor versus the run, which his athletic profile might suggest. Once again, like I mentioned with Wazirike, not much proven talent on interior D-line for the Broncos, so getting an upside player like this makes sense. And then finally Hicks here. I unfortunately didn't get to watch in depth, but my short summary on what I saw from him: slightly undersized corner with modest athletic profile and very limited ball production, but has the physicality to impede receivers in their routes and is willing to contribute in run support. So take that as you may. Don't have an in-depth analysis on him, like I said. But looking at this class as a whole, with Bonita up first, they probably looked at him as the best player available at that point, at a value position, while they fill out the roster mostly with the rest of the class, evening out some of the losses that they had this offseason, in part because of what they had to give up in the Russell Wilson trade, and addressing areas that were issues for them last season. Dulcich presents a lot of qualities that they had in Noah Fant. Mathis is looking to fill in for Kyle Fuller as that field side corner, and at least in competition for that role, while having found the replacement in the slot already in free agency, with K'Wan Williams, like I said. They get a couple of highly talented interior defensive linemen to make up for the loss of Shelby Harris, who's been a very effective player for them. Depth at a couple of other spots, and in Washington can help them turn around one of the weakest return units in the league into strength potentially, which a couple of the other picks were probably intended to help out on teams as well. So all in all, I actually like this draft quite a bit, even though there weren't any major value picks necessarily. And of course I'm excited to see what this roster can do now that they actually have some quality quarterback play. But a team that is already proven is up next here with the Kansas City Chiefs, who I already declared as one of the biggest winners from the draft, in particular the defensive coordinator Steve Spagnuolo, with 3 defensive players from the first 2 rounds and 5 total within the first 135 picks, which they had that extra draft capital from the Dolphins as part of the Tyreek Hill trade. In total they made 10 selections, with the first 2 being in round 1, 21st overall Trent McDuffie, cornerback Washington, and 30th overall George Karlaftis, edge defender out of Purdue. Then 2 second rounders, 54th overall Sky Moore, wide receiver Western Michigan, and 62nd overall Brian Cook, safety Cincinnati. Then in the 3rd round, 103rd overall Leo Chanel, linebacker Wisconsin. 4th round, 135th overall Joshua Williams, cornerback Fayetteville State. 5th round, 145th overall Darren Kennard, offensive tackle / interior O-lineman out of Kentucky. And then 3 7th rounders, Jalen Watson, cornerback Washington State, Isaiah Pacheco, running back Rutgers, and Nazi Johnson, cornerback Marshall. First up here with McDuffie, 5'11", 195 pounds, with pretty good thickness for his frame, moves so smoothly laterally as he caps over vertical stems, quick to realize when he's supposed to fall off his initial responsibility in zone, drives down on completions in front of him, and has a real hops to high punt the ball down the field, can work in press man with patient feet, and is very involved against the run and screen game as arguably the top tackling corner in this entire draft, missing only 4 of 32 attempts last season, with plenty of those against bigger guys in tough situations out on the perimeter. McDuffie has very limited ball production to his name, however, with only 11 passes defensed on 100 career targets. He did a dose of off zone and could improve his ability to squeeze down receivers in that, with little experience actually disrupting releases and his arms measuring in at just below 30 inches. So that's certainly under the cutoff that you usually see. I think there hasn't been an all-pro corner below 31 inches in the last 12 years or so. Kansas City lost 2 key pieces in the secondary this offseason in Tyrann Mathieu and Charvarius Ward. McDuffie might be able to replace either here, certainly having that experience out of corner, but also his instinct in zone and love for contact could mean that they want to plug him in that honey badger role, at least in sub packages, depending on how creative Spags wants to get with their free agency addition of Justin Reed. And the other first rounder, George Karlaftis, presents a dense muscular frame with the body type of a 5 technique almost. When I was doing my notes, something that I wrote down with him, a smack you in the face type of player who approaches blockers with heavy hands in the run game, can stop the flow of the offense and chases the ball hard, and he doesn't mind banging into stiff blocks either. I thought his first step and activity level improved last season as a pass rusher, where he displays non-stop hands usage, is looking to take a pretty direct path towards the quarterback, as one of the top power rushers in this class, who quickly recognizes and crashes through the inside shoulder of tackles, oversetting him to the outside. Certainly not a very twitchy or sudden athlete, I would say. It's quite a linear pass rusher as well, with some stiffness to him to execute fluid inside counters. His spin move in particular isn't very effective at all, At 32.5-inch arms, his length is on the low end of the spectrum, and his one issue in run defense is the lack of lateral agility to come off blocks and make stops, which he didn't do at the combine, so we don't have numbers on that, and I don't think they would have been particularly good. And I wouldn't have been a huge fan of Kalafdis in the mid-first or something like that, but here at the end of it, I'm totally on board with it as a hard-nosed edge defender and power rusher for a team that really needed some reinforcements there, even if it doesn't match the profile of these lanky defensive ends that have usually targeted in Kansas City. Bringing us to the second round, where they made 2 more picks, first up with Sky Moore, which is still kind of crazy to me because I mocked him to Kansas City at 29th overall, but not only do they get him a round later, but they also move back another 4 spots with New England and pick up a 5th rounder along the way. Moore brings an interesting build or body composition as a shorter receiver with a trunky lower body. His burst off the line, pops off the screen, can get defenders off balance with some hesitation and burst to attack vertically, but can also really sit in the chair and make cuts. Has those large soft hands north of 10 inches that almost swallow the football, but also can snatch it out of the air in traffic, dropping only 6 of 176 catchable targets in his career. Plus then he has the quick burst after the grab and tremendous contact balance to make things happen with the ball in his hands. He wasn't asked to run any overly intricate routes at Western Michigan, and you can notice a gear down when he has to make sharper breaks, as well as maybe not elite long speed, which is why he was primarily operating out of the slot. And while I like the aggressiveness as a blocker, Moore can get a little overzealous and overshoot his targets instead of breaking down in space. I thought this was awesome value here, at a position where he still needed an element like this, where they have Juju Smith-Schuster as this power slot now. Marcus Valdes-Scantling offers more of a vertical component on the outside, but now they bring in Moore, who offers a more similar stalker build to Tyreek Hill and can really excel as a run-after-catch specialist for them. Certainly not at the level that Cheetah was able to do for them, but kind of a similar type of athlete, even if he doesn't have that top-end gear. And the other second rounder, Brian Cook, started his career at an HBCU in Howard University before he showed some signs as a backup in 2020 at Cincinnati and became a first-team All-AAC player for one of the top defenses in the country last season. Has the looks and mentality of a box safety, but he's gained experience with a multitude of coverage responsibility as the Bearcats boundary safety. Stays balanced while paddling backwards as he's deciphering route patterns, but then as he sees the quarterback load up, he can cover ground pretty well. Love what he can do dropping down as a robber and picking up crosser that kind of get lost in traffic. In run support, Cook keeps his shoulders square to the line of scrimmage, but shows no hesitation to fill gaps and wrap up bigger ball carriers to great effect. He doesn't seem overly comfortable against receivers stemming vertically when left 1-1, I would say. Simply doesn't have the loosest lower body or quickest feet in that regard. And more advanced quarterback can get Cook leaning the wrong way with the eyes. Plus he can get a little too aggressive with his angles towards the sideline from depth. Once again, you find replacements in the secondary, along with having brought in Justin Reed. Now maybe Cook fills in more what they used to have with the third safety, playing closer to the line of scrimmage and being involved in the pressure packages potentially, but he features an intriguing skill set. Which brings us to Leo Chanel, an absolute workout warrior at a massive 6'2 plus 260 pounds, has the force to actually stonewall guards trying to work his way in the run game and create those car crash collisions that way. While being like a bear to get away from as a tackler, he was heavily utilized as a blitzer by Wisconsin's defensive coordinator Jim Leonard, where he shows freaky closing burst and a ton of melts on being built up to ride guys backwards into the quarterback's lap. And I'm not just talking about running backs here. Wisconsin didn't put him in coverage a whole lot for a reason though. There's certainly a stiffness to his game where he'll struggle to mirror guys out of the backfield in man or just change directions in general, and his blitzing at this point is all about running through people rather than attacking half the man and showing some kind of plan to feed the hands. This is actually what Spags wants from his linebackers in terms of big inside thumpers who can threaten in those mug looks and great push up the middle to set up one of those other rushers by banging into guys. Tough to see him start over Nick Bolton, coming off an excellent rookie season, and Will Gay gives them more of a run and chase will, but as a package play and backup, there's a lot to like here with Chanel. And now finally after 5 picks we get to day 3, where they started things off with Joshua Williams, who's a physical specimen at the cornerback spot, as he ranks above the 90th percentile in height at 6'3" and length with a 78-inch wingspan, punches at the chest of receivers with those long arms to keep them away from his famous blockers, aims low and shoots through the hips of ball carriers to get him to the ground. He frequently blanketed receivers at his level of competition by jamming them at the line and not allowing them any angle to release, but he's also super fluid in his turns for his height and can wrap around targets to knock down passes in impressive fashion. Going to the pros will be a major jump in level of competition from Division 2, considering how much he was able to just crowd receivers with his length and recover with athleticism. Certainly had his issues sticking with more advanced route runners at Senior Bowl practices, got turned around pretty badly a couple of times, while his style of play will be heavily penalized by NFL referees with how grabby he can get. With Mike Hughes also gone at corner, the Chiefs needed an influx of young talent, and Williams is somebody who can really pay off down the line, as somebody who projects well, having to get into the face of receivers, as they like to go to those heavy press man looks. And then in the 5th round with Darren Kennard, was a first-team All-American right tackle this past season, has some serious girth throughout his frame, with large quads and calves at 6'5", 325 pounds, with monstrous 11.25-inch hands to grab guys, and then he brings a mean streak in the run game. His reactive quickness to adjust the targets on the second level is a plus. As a pass protector, the 35-inch arms are helpful with the way that he can punch at rushers and widen the arc that way, and he can dig those cleats into the turf to stall bull rush attempts, and that's been very effective, only allowing 1 sack and 6 total pressures on over 400 pass blocking snaps last season. He does play a little high overall for my taste though. His weight distribution in the run game gives him issue at times, and so does his inability to mirror inside counters that well, where I believe he just doesn't have the tackle feet, along with being pretty wide with his hands, so I thought all along that he was a guard, but just great value here, similar to getting Trey Smith in the 6th round last year, who was one of the best rookie guards in the league, although I love Trey's film a lot more. Only here, I don't know anything about a concerning medical situation, probably gonna back up the 2 guard spots and maybe kick back out to tackle in a pinch. So getting a versatile piece here like this in the 5th round, who a lot of people projected to go somewhere on day 2, that's definitely a great value pick. And then the 3 7th rounders, where I want to go into more detail about Jalen Watson here first, because he was one of my favorite sleeper prospects at the cornerback spot. 6'1.5", 200 pounds with 32.5-inch arms, primarily lined up in the boundary and almost effortless with the way that he can mirror releases, force receivers to work through him, and even when he's caught leaning the wrong way, having the snappy hips to quickly get back into the hip pocket of his man, has those long arms to play through the hands of the receiver, while tracking the eyes of the quarterback and following receivers towards the safety effectively in zone. He does get caught biting on double releases too often, and his play styling off coverage is largely based on catching receivers 5 yards off the line of scrimmage. Most importantly, he needs to do a better job of leveraging the football, using the sideline as that extra defender and improving as a tackler, having missed 9 of 40 attempts last season. But like I said, one of my personal favorites at the cornerback spot, and I actually had him ranked higher than Joshua Williams, who he got more than 100 spots earlier. The draft status would dictate that he won't see the field a whole lot early on, but I think he's ready to go and can surprise some people as a late round gem. Isaiah Pacheco is a fun space player here for a team that excels at opening up the field, and now he can put the ball in his hands with some room to work a few times on longer downs, while having the burst to threaten the edges of the defense maybe on some fly sweeps and toss plays and stuff like that. As a 4th running back probably, who can add some value in the return game, I like what they did here, even though they actually added a similar type of player as an undrafted free agent in Ole Miss's Jaron Ely later. And then finally Najee Johnson, the one guy here that I didn't get to study, pretty short and didn't necessarily stand out in a few games that I watched from Marshall, but a 4-year starter with solid ball production and 4.35 speed, so maybe at least on special teams he can give you something if he makes it through roster cuts. General manager Brett Veach put together one of the best all-around draft classes I believe here, which is why I also mentioned them as one of my biggest winners, particularly with the heavy investments on defense, adding probably 3 starters on the big nickel package at least, a linebacker who's a load to handle coming forward, and a couple of corners with the talent to eventually turn themselves into starters. Then you grab Sky Moore late in the 2nd, who could have easily been the pick at the end of the 1st, and largely projected day 2 offensive lineman and Derek Kennard in the 150s. The amount of value that they were able to accumulate, how those players will help them against some of the departures that we've seen, and were necessary to some degree to stay under the cap, and just reformulating the roster to some degree without really having to sacrifice any period of rebuilding time, so to speak. It's pretty special what they've done here. Nobody's talking about the Chiefs right now because of all the up-and-coming teams in the AFC and what the rest of the division has done, but look out, because they may look different, but they're still a force to be reckoned with. Bringing us to Las Vegas, who certainly didn't have as much capital, with just 1 pick before day 3. The first 2 selections obviously were used to acquire superstar wide receiver Davante Adams from Green Bay, but I thought they were able to invest into the areas that really needed reinforcements with some solid mid-round picks. The 6 selections that they made: 3rd round 90th overall Dylan Parham, interior O-lineman out of Memphis, 2 4th rounders, 122nd overall Samir White, running back Georgia, and 126th overall interior D-lineman Neil Farrell out of LSU. Then in the 5th round, 175th overall, another IDL, Matthew Butler, Tennessee, and then 2 7th round picks, Faye Munford Jr., the offensive tackle / interior O-lineman at Ohio State, and finally Britton Brown, running back UCLA. The one selection that they did make on day 2, Dylan Parham, a guy who shows Cadillac quickness off the snap and consistently gets his first step down to establish positioning in the run game. Plus he has the mobility to really sink his hips and win the pad level battle. Whether it was skip pulls, scoop blocks, beating linebackers to the spot in space, his mobility in that regard was a major plus for the team. Playing out a tackle for Memphis back in 2020, he has the foot quickness to cut off angles and ability to mirror counters laterally. Also has some really strong hands to grab cloth and can slow down charging linebackers by gradually giving ground. Looking at his last 2 seasons in college, he only gave up 1 sack and 18 total pressures across well over 1,000 pass blocking snaps. He does however present very narrow shoulders and frame altogether, with subpar measurements for a tackle spot. Project him inside, he may not be somebody you want getting defensive tackles off the landmarks on gap-based schemes, and in pass pro, he can have some balance issues with the way that he can overset at times against wider alignments. While Mississippi State was the only Power 5 school on Memphis' schedule over the past 2 seasons, Parham can probably start right away at either guard spot, assuming they want to keep Alex Leatherwood at right tackle, since they really like Andre James at center it seems like, moving on from Rodney Hudson and cap purposes for him last offseason, and Parham gives you some flexibility if you suffer any injuries up front, not having to shuffle around pieces a whole lot. Then in the 4th round with Zamir White, who was the number 1 running back recruit back in 2018, didn't touch the ball a whole lot early on due to having DeAndre Swift in front of him, but over the last 2 years he's carried the ball 300 times for well over 1,600 yards combined and 11 touchdowns each. Has some good wiggle and power as a runner with plus vision and patience, runs with constant forward lean, and what he's really good at is rarely allowing straight wraps unless he wants to just lower the boom on somebody, and he also has the size and mindset to anchor down against charging blitzers in pass pro. White has solid build-up speed, but I wouldn't call him a home run threat, and he's not going to foot fake defenders in the open field necessarily. Only put up 17 career receptions, and was mostly limited to flare-outs in the pass game. He's already suffered 2 ACL tears during his time in Athens, and while he saw a little bit of lateral movement last season, I thought, there's concern about the long-term health and maybe some mobility limitations. This gives the Raiders a type of running back that they don't necessarily have on the roster. Josh Jacobs has been pretty damn good for them, but looking back at his time at Alabama, and to some degree as a rookie, limiting the pounding that he takes and allowing him to stay fresh makes him far more effective. So now you add more of an inside pounder with explosive traits, and you allow Jacobs to shine more again in his role as well. Which brings us to the 2 interior D linemen, first up with Neil Farrell, 6'4", 340 pounds, with a plus get up for a nose tackle, really fires his hands into the chest of blockers, defending the run with outstanding pad level, and has great girth in space to not allow himself to be moved off the spot. He can get upfield and deny combo blocks developing, has that natural power to ride blockers back into the quarterback space, where those guys can't really step up. Plus he can work through contact with the rip, and actually flashes a promising spin move I would say. He does have fairly short arms at 32 inches to really be able to lock out, and lacks the lateral agility to work over the top of blocks. At times he blindly shoots upfield, and doesn't bring much twitch to really threaten the edges of blockers in the pass game, which is why you rarely saw the field in longer downs at LSU, and that probably won't change in the NFL. Vegas just needed to add beef on the D-line, and now you have a 2-down run-stopping specialist in Farrell behind Jonathan Hankins, who they brought back on another 1-year deal, and probably are looking to replace eventually. Maybe a tad early for me, but I see what they're doing here. And then with Matthew Butler, a guy that I really love, 6'3" with a dense frame that carries 300 pounds extremely well. Primarily it's a free technique with the ability to play gap control or penetrate. Has the force in his hands to jolt back the pads of blockers at the point of attack and keep his own chest clean with an 81.5 inch wingspan. And what I love about him is that you see him chase after the ball 30-40 yards down the field on several occasions. The way Butler wins as a pass rusher is with active and violent hands, plus he can add some shake to his rushes. He was really wrecking shop that way at East-West Shrine practices. Didn't break out until his 5th year senior campaign however, and become a playmaker for the Vols, as he finally reached more than 3 tackles for loss. He gets pushed sideways too easily by presenting the size of his shoulder pads and selling out to get to the outside edges of blockers at times, while his rushes are too reckless at this point, and has room for improvement at stringing together moves throughout games. Certainly a different type of interior D lineman than Farrell, much more juice off the snap, and can bring them a penetration element as a free technique, which they currently expect from Vernon Butler, who has never played half of the defensive snaps in Carolina or Buffalo, with 0 sacks over the last 2 years. I believe this Butler right here could easily end up starting at that spot, and be a difference maker for them down the road. And then the 2 7th rounders, first up with Faye Munford, a guy who presents good thickness from the knees up, but rather skinny calves I would say in comparison, which allowed him to move around well, and that's why he actually started at left tackle until this past season when he moved inside. He does a really good job of washing down guys in zone runs and opening up those cutback lanes while showing impressive bursts to get out in front as a puller. And he has been one of the most effective pass protectors in college football, squaring up rushers, keeping his elbows in tight, and utilizing alternate hand usage to keep rushers off kilter. Some balance issues show up all over his tape, even if he has improved his technique enough to mask those mostly, lacks the lower body flexibility to bring his base around and consistently execute reach or seal blocks on wide zone runs, and he can kind of get his feet stuck in the turf going up against twitchy pass rushers on the interior. Most likely not going to start for them, but another guy with great positional flexibility across the offensive line who won't be overwhelmed when he has to be thrown in there. And finally Britton Brown, once again that final guy being the one that I didn't study specifically, but originally watched Zach Charbonnet already, who's one of my favorite backs for next year's draft. Brown is a guy with good size at around 210 pounds, but also pretty light feet to navigate around traffic, and steps up confidently in pass pro, but just lacks any type of breakaway speed, running the mid 4.6s, and a long shot to make the roster at this point I would say, since I like the UDFA Sincere McCormick significantly better actually, although a different type of player. The Raiders had already acquired their new number 1 receiver in Davante Adams, so this draft class was pretty straightforward, investing into the interior offensive and defensive lines, plus a physical running back. I thought they didn't do bad at all, having Dylan Parham fall to them, who I looked at as a late 2nd rounder. White certainly is a very talented runner. If he can overcome those 2 ACL surgeries that he's already had in college, you maybe get your starting duo of defensive tackle for the future, a versatile depth piece on the O-line, and another late round back who I'm not crazy about, but he's the 250th pick, so who really cares? Kind of fooled me with all the cornerbacks that he brought in on top 30 visits, and he actually didn't address the defense on the 2nd or 3rd level at all, but they did bring in Chandler Jones as a free agent to give them an even better threat across from Max Crosby. They quietly signed Jayon Brown at linebacker and added some pieces at corner, which really a deeper group than it was in 2021. So the draft wasn't necessarily where they were going to make a major impact on the roster compared to the rest of the offseason, but they did add to the trenches, which they hadn't done so far, and it coincides well with all the other moves that they made, along with making some nice value picks here. Bringing us to the final team for today and the entire breakdown series with the Los Angeles Chargers, who could have gone a lot of different directions here, since they had made a bunch of key offseason acquisitions already to maximize the window that they have with Justin Herbert on his rookie deal. For example, I had them going with Ohio State wide receiver Chris Olave in my ultimate mock draft, and they didn't even select a receiver at all throughout the weekend. And they really just followed the stick and pick principle, making the selections they came into the weekend with, which didn't include a 2nd rounder due to the trade for Khalil Mack, and then they gave up 2 of the final 10 picks, once again trading with Chicago for a 6th rounder next year. But that was about it. The selections that they made: 1st round 17th overall Zion Johnson, interior O-lineman at Boston College; 3rd round 79th overall JT Woods, safety Baylor; 4th round 123rd overall Isaiah Spiller, running back Texas A&M; 5th round 160th overall Otito Ogbonia, interior D-lineman out of UCLA; then 3 6th rounders, Jamari Salyer, interior O-line Georgia; 2 corners, Jazir Taylor at Wake Forest, and Dean Leonard Ole Miss; and then finally in the 7th round, Xander Horvath, fullback out of Purdue. So at the top with Johnson here, who was my number 12 overall prospect, and one of the true can't-miss guys in this whole draft I believe, has a doctor in computer science, or is bound to get one, and you see those smarts show up in his game, with subtle adjustments in his technique depending on defensive alignment and stuff like that. Plus then of course he looks like a guard that was built in a lab, with serious curve throughout his frame, consistently plays low, and can dig defenders out of the A-gap, or execute reach blocks with improved quicks off the snap. Absurd ability to keep his full cleats in turf and anchor against power rushes, and he's very efficient overall with his footwork while offering a help hand to his teammates when he can. The one clear area of improvement is his eyes to identify games up front and not get locked in with one man on twists or miss a 2nd level rusher because of it. He can get over his skis at times in the run game, and while he did start a full season at left tackle, I don't believe he necessarily brings that versatility to the table, as he was prone to oversetting out there pretty frequently. But he's going to be an immense upgrade at right guard over Ode Abushi or Brent Kaimes, who saw some action for them as a rookie. They continue to fortify the offensive line to protect Justin Herbert, and Johnson is going to help them boost that run game. Right tackle remains a question mark, but I like the strategy a lot better than maybe grabbing Northern Iowa's Trevor Penning, for example. A good 60 spots later with JT Woods, a guy who understands when he has the green light to fly upfield and try to create very limited yardage in the run game, and he will arrive there in a hurry before chopping guys down low. That range shows up in coverage as well, where he's capable of playing as a true center fielder, but also flip and run with slot receivers when he's in more too high shells. Last season, he was the only FBS player with less than 2 touchdowns and 5 interceptions in coverage, and he's dangerous with the ball in his hands. He did however have horrible grading in run defense due to how often he can get over-aggressive and not aim at the outside tip of ball carriers on runs out to the perimeter, while refusing to break down in space, which led to 14 missed tackles last season. At times he'll lose his eyes in the backfield, and a lot of his interceptions came on overthrown or deflected passes rather than anticipatory plays on the ball. This is somebody with great ball skills on the back end to add to what they already have with Derwin James and Nasir Adderley. They probably felt like adding a player like this would allow them to use those two close to the line of scrimmage at times, particularly with the way that Derwin excelled as a blitzer off the slot early on in his career, and what he can bring capped over tight ends. Moving us to day 3, where they kicked things off with Isaiah Spiller, my number 3 overall running back, 6'1", 225 pounds, thick lower body, runs with a lot of power and consistently falls forward for an extra yard or two. However, for that size, he also has sweet feet to navigate around traffic and get around defenders in the hole at a high rate. So quick to translate information from his eyes to his feet, and can adjust his running path rapidly whilst on the fly, whilst making good use of stutter steps as well as a violent plant. He can really stymie blitzes in pass pro or redirect guys who seem to have an angle initially, plus he has reliable hands and is a tough tackle out in space. He does trust his speed a little too much and tries to bounce out to the edges more so than he probably should, considering he ran in mid 4.6s at the in pro day. He gets a little too cute at times, where I just want him to use his size and go through people, and like 90% of the routes that he ran with the Aggies were swings or chip and hooks over the middle. This guy should be an outstanding complement to what they already have in Austin Eckler, who's still somehow underrated I feel like, but you get more of a size back who excels at setting up inside zone runs, obviously can get the job done in passing downs, and now you can keep Eckler healthy and fresh. So I think those two will really complement each other well. Then they went interior defensive and offensive line next. First up with Ogbonia, who famously squatted 685 pounds at UCLA, which earned him a spot on the 2021 Feldman's Freak list. And he's kind of built like a fridge, with a ridiculous 83.5-inch wingspan to keep his frame clean, and has been a nearly immovable object in the middle of that Bruin defense. He's so strong in his core and hips to hold his ground against combo blocks, but showed more of a willingness to be a playmaker in that regard last season, backdooring zone blockers and stuff like that. He has the power as well to ride guys back into the quarterback's lap, packs a forceful rip move, and can draw 2 bodies with him as a setup man on twists. His first step, and this may have something to do with the role that he was playing, but it kind of leaves things to be desired, and he allows opposing linemen to get the base around him on reach or scoop blocks. Doesn't really have any quick twitch to speak of to keep blockers off balance with any type of counters or secondary hand combats as a pass rusher, and is more so a pocket pusher in that regard. Continuing to add beef to a D-line that got murdered at times last season for the Chargers, and a lot of it had to do with being in box looks that were nearly impossible to stop the run out of, particularly with the bodies that they had in there. This offseason they bring in Sebastian Joseph Day, Austin Johnson, Morgan Fox, and now Ogbonia. It's gonna be a lot different, and they'll actually be comfortable living in those 2 high looks. I'm currently working on a piece discussing the most improved position groups, and the Chargers may make an appearance, or even 2. Which brings us to Jamari Salyer, the number 1 guard recruit in the country in 2018, starting 24 games total with experience at every single spot along the O-line for Georgia. He's built like a tank almost, with a massive torso and a rather small head. He consistently creates knockback at first contact in the run game, and while he did start at left tackle for the Bulldogs, when he did kick inside, that usually got the rushing attack cranked up, such as the second half of the national championship. I thought he showed much better balance in pass pro this past season, keeping his feet underneath himself, packs a powerful initial strike, and redirects very well, leading to only 4 total pressures surrendered on nearly 300 pass blocking snaps last year. Unfortunately, he tends to bend at the waist a lot, and can get pretty top heavy, which becomes an issue against defenders who can pull cloth effectively and force him to fall off blocks. He doesn't look very comfortable getting out in space and finding targets, and he has pretty small hands, which you saw at the Senior Bowl slip high and wide quite a bit. Going much later than most people expected here for Salyer. I personally was lower on him than consensus draft media, but a very solid guard backup, with the ability to kick back out to tackle when needed, having played on the blind side with great success in the SEC, so here in the 6th round, definitely a value pick. Then the 2 corners with Taylor here first, a 5-year player for Wake, who started the latter too and had some pretty good ball production with 2 picks and 15 pass breakups across that stretch. Has the fluid lower half to mirror routes and the speed to run with guys down the sideline. Working in the boundary mostly, you see him get matched up with tight ends at times and actively putting his hands on them as well, while fighting through the hands out the target at the end of it effectively. Unfortunately, he certainly saw drop-off in play last year, was penalized 9 times and responsible for 5 touchdowns. His route anticipation ability to stay in phase kind of leave things to be desired, and while I appreciate the willingness to beat blockers and get involved in run support, he simply lacks in play strength to actually make an impact. Not the deepest group of corners for LA here, and Taylor has some athletic traits to work with. Certainly guys I like better at the position still out there, but I just didn't get to meet with the guy like the team probably did. And maybe there was something going on medically that kind of hindered him in his final season, and you saw the drop off because of it. And then Leonard, very similar story to Taylor, who we just talked about, only slightly bigger and faster actually, at 6'1", 195 pounds, with 4.37 speed. Didn't actually know he was draftable when I watched some of the other guys on the Ole Miss defense, but certainly had some stuff to work with in terms of the balance and explosiveness to mirror guys in soft press and carry them vertically. Can really attack forward out of that side pill position and play up to his size defending the run, but his reaction time isn't quite up to par yet, and he wasn't able to intercept any passes in his 2 years in the SEC after transferring over from Calgary. And then finally Xander Horvath, a guy who played tailback for the most part at Purdue, but is absolutely jacked at 230 plus pounds and brings a lot of physicality to the table. When you look at him pull through tackles as a ball carrier, take on blitzes in pass pro, and lead the way on jet sweeps for example. Projected as this fullback or H-back, if that's the plan in mind, I think he's going to help them diversify their run game to some degree, with what we see to a much larger extent, of course, with Kyle Juszczyk in San Francisco, as another guy who can execute difficult blocks on the move and contribute as a receiver out of the backfield, even if he may not be able to flex out wide and beat that kind of chess piece, which is understandable because Juszczyk is pretty unique. So as a whole, other than the Woods pick in the 3rd, I thought the Chargers did pretty well here, with Zion to me being a slam dunk selection in the 1st, Isaiah Spiller kind of a crazy steal in the 4th as this super well-rounded back who had an early 2 on, Luke Sally as a solid backup, positional flexibility late. Maybe I would have liked to see them use one of those late swings that they had at a wide receiver instead of 2 corners, but then Horvath I'm kind of intrigued by with the vision that they have for his role in the offense and what it could look like. When you look at all the picks together, this was really all about running the ball and stopping the run for this group, which is kind of refreshing to see for an analytics-driven organization who took some blame that wasn't really justified as much in terms of the 4th down aggressiveness, but certainly in terms of devaluing the ground game and putting themselves in some run fits that physical opponents were able to take advantage of. I'm very happy that I got a plus 400 Chargers ticket right now to win the division, because they're at like plus 230 or something like that at this point, and have really pushed the chips into the middle of the table this offseason with all of those additions, whilst they still don't have to pay their young superstar quarterback, and this was another step towards being a serious contender in the loaded AFC. So now we get to a divisional draft rankings, where I took a bit of a different approach here, just wanting to point out how well the Chiefs did at the top, and the fact that I think the margin between the other 3 teams is razor thin, all having done stuff that I certainly liked, even though they might have taken different approaches. So with the Chiefs, I wanted to highlight them here because I thought in terms of acquiring prospects at plus value for all 7 rounds basically, they deserve a ton of credit here, not just based on my personal evaluations, but looking at consensus boards, understanding the teams around them, where they may have to trade up, and when there's an opportunity to move back a few spots and kind of still get that guy. At least the first 3 picks should all start for this team, at least one of the next 2 should be in a significant piece on one of the sub-packages defensively, and then there's a great combination of instant depth guys and a couple of upside names. So I absolutely love what they did here. And once again, the difference between the 3 other squads is marginal, but if I had to put them in order, the one on the screen would be my way to put them. First with the Broncos, who kind of treated the first selection more like a first round pick as well, with the best player available approach on Nick Bonito, which I might have been a little lower on, but I do of course see the upside here, and he's going to be a pass rush specialist for them early on probably, before they fill out the roster with almost all at or above value picks, making up for some of the losses that they suffered this offseason, and addressing a couple of questionable areas looking back at 2021, with Dulcich potentially being a one-on-one replacement for Noah Fant, more bodies on the D-line, a designated return specialist, in some competition at spots that aren't 100% set. Then the Raiders, who certainly had the least amount of draft capital coming into the weekend and didn't necessarily draft any stars, but with the trade for Davante Adams and a couple of big signings on defense via free agency, they focused on bolstering the trenches on either side of the ball, with likely a starter and a backup who give them some flexibility on the O-line, potentially the new starting duo of D tackles for 2023 on base downs, a great complementary back to Josh Jacobs to take some pressure off him and make him more effective on the touches that he receives. That was all pretty damn good, even if I expected them to grab a corner with one of those early picks with what they told us in the pre-draft process. And then finally the Chargers didn't hate what they put together here at all, grabbing a can't-miss guy in Zion Johnson at the top. Wasn't in love with JT Woods as the next pick in the third round, but I get what they see in terms of a safety with great range and ball skills. Isaiah Spiller as my RB3 in the fourth round is pretty crazy. They strengthen the interior of the O-line with a couple of late value picks, grab a couple of developmental corners for a group that isn't particularly deep beyond the top 4 names, and then Sander Horwitz as the third to final pick as a potential piece at full or H-back is kind of intriguing to me. So once again, I thought these drafts were all average or better. I just wanted to point out the Chiefs as one of the top 3 classes overall probably. But we've done it! All 8 NFL divisions, 262 players, with overviews of each class and in-division rankings. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and share with a couple of friends who maybe are waiting desperately to get us through the offseason and need some detailed NFL content. With this series being wrapped up, we finally closed the book on the 2022 NFL Draft, which by now happened nearly 1.5 months ago, but I always like to take a step back, analyze each team's roster, and how the draft classes coincide with the way that they built those up, giving all 32 teams their spotlight. To me, that's much more interesting than getting into all kinds of weird off-season content with no actual meaning, just putting together random lists and stuff like that. We'll cut back on the frequency of uploads now and go back to more written content, which you can find on my page at Footballtalk.com. The link for that and my social media handles are down below in the video description, as well as on the screen here right now. Want to learn more about every other team's class? Just go ahead and click the video at the top right corner. Feel free to binge listen to these or just find certain teams that you're interested in with the timestamps that I added. Next up I have a written article on the most improved position groups this offseason. Then we'll go through the biggest areas each team should still address based on my evaluations of the roster back here on YouTube. We got training camp battles, then preseason power rankings and all kinds of stuff. I'll make sure to provide some entertainment in the dark parts of the NFL offseason and would love for you to follow along. So until then, see you later. Peace!